Well, good morning. We're here in the centre of Christchurch to look at our second instalment around this big question that we've been looking at of what is truth? We're here in Christchurch in our community, one of our communities around Branscore. And there's the hustle and bustle of the shoppers are out today on this Friday. And as we think about community, we want to look at that word and look at it from a biblical perspective. And what is community? Well, this morning we have Berno with us, who's going to help us look at this question. Morning, Berno.
Good morning, Andy.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good time catching up shopping here and seeing you here.
Well, it's good. It's
like
good.
we planned it.
Almost like we did. For those of you who don't know Berno, Berno is the new associate pastor of Branscore Community Church. We have the joy of working together. And Berno, also, you have a channel, don't you, called Countercultural Christian, in which you've been really looking at what does it mean to be the people of God. And you've been looking quite heavily at this whole area of community and what community means. Yeah. Well, today, hopefully, we're going to be able to answer that from a biblical perspective. But before we do, just looking at the community in which we're in, how do we understand this word? First and foremostly, through the lens of the world. And what might be some of the challenges of seeing it from that perspective when we look to the Bible?
Okay. Well, I think as Westerners, we tend to think community a lot around geography, so place. We think about schools, for instance, and where, there's a lot of people coming together and doing something together. So, and as Christians as well, we see ourselves as a community and we gather on Sundays together, and that's a big part of what it means to be a community for us. So we get together and share something in common, really. But it's a lot more based around the physical, material world that we find ourselves in. And actually, my problem is, as Westerners, we really lose sight of the kind of the foundation of community, which is relationship. And that's what I want to press into and say, actually, we need to renovate our idea of community, because particularly as Christians, but also more broadly speaking as humans, because that really makes a significant difference in how we live out this life to show the world who God really is.
So from a cultural point of view, it's around geography in the world's eyes, it's around commonality, shared interests, but as we dive into the Bible, we're going to see it's so much more.
No, there's so much more there that really makes us think we have to be a lot more intentional with how we live our lives, really, and what it means to be a community.
And as we think about that, and we're obviously going to look at that in just a moment, but what would you see are the challenges to what we're about to look at from a biblical perspective of community? What do you think the challenges are in our own Western culture today that are perhaps opposed to that ideal?
I think we're very practical thinkers as Westerners, very pragmatic. It affects the way we see success and how we build our lives and what does that look like. And because we're so pragmatic, we're very focused on the material side of life. And that can distract us, but also underneath that, there's really, we see ourselves as individuals, and we build a life around us as an individual. What are my desires and what is the life I want to build for myself? And we then incorporate that into our families. Okay, for my family. So we're very, very much focused on ourselves and how can we create an experience of life that makes us live the good life based on our material perceptions and the world around us, what we think is important and valuable. But those things are, if you really dig down, you find that the foundation of that comes from a materialistic point of view, the idea that actually God doesn't necessarily exist, or maybe God does exist, but he's distant. And so we have to look after ourselves, look out for number one, and I'm number one.
Okay, so right at the heart of it, individualism, materialism, and self.
Oh, totally,
which we know is the great issue of sin, isn't it, that we see in the world. Okay, great. We're going to move on to our next location, where we're going to start to dig into some of the foundation and the heritage that we can see within the Bible to this word community. So come with us.
I didn't bring a spade. Do I need to go and get my spade?
No. We're going to go just literally go and find some ruins.
All right.
So as we leave the hustle and bustle of Christchurch behind us in its individualism and its materialism, we find ourselves here amongst an 18th century castle called Christchurch Castle. Those two words together have such significance, Christ Church. And we see the heritage that has spanned over the generations in this community. But as we've just seen, some of it seems to have been lost in this ideology that the world has come and brought upon us. So as we dive into the Bible, perhaps we can find a model, a framework of what it means to be the people of God and what community should look like. But we're missing someone. Where's Berno? Let's see if we can find him and answer that very question together. Oh, Berno.
Oh, hey, Andy. You're a bit late, but welcome.
What can I say? I'm sorry. It's a bit of a walk. So, the next question I've got for you today, Berno, is we've just been looking at the materialism and the individualism of our age and how that really kind of distorts what it means to be community from a biblical perspective. So as we dive into the pages of the Bible, as we turn over that first page, as we go through Genesis and we look through the Exodus and we look at the people of God, how do we see community through the lens of both God and that people?
Well, I think it's not just the people of God that community is important to. It's humanity,
Right.
really, because you open the Bible up, very first passage of, or the start of Genesis, as this whole scene of creation plays out and people are made in the image of God. Like, community is at the heart of that.
Right.
And so to see it just as the people of God, actually this is for all of humanity.
Yeah.
But then also in those early chapters, you discover how humanity got disconnected from God. So God is the source of community, the source of love and everything it means to be community.
It's that issue of self we were talking about earlier on.
Exactly. So right at the start, we see here's a problem with humanity. And then as the story develops and you get to Abraham and the people that follow, and eventually to the people of God being rescued from Egypt, they're calling out to God. They say, God, come and rescue us because we're completely trapped within this slavery of humanity and sin and destruction. And God does that, answers their call, because that's, again, a promise he made to Abraham and the family. And he says, right, I've picked this family, I'm going to journey with you. And when he rescues them, you get to the foot of Mount Sinai, and God asks these people, right, you've just seen what I've done. I've rescued you. I've answered your call. And you can see what I've done, and I want to carry this on. I want you to be my people. Will you be my people? And the people answer, yeah, you will be our God, and we will be your people. And then God establishes this whole system, I guess you could call it, or this way of life for these people. And it's all laid out in Leviticus, and it's this call, be holy, for I am holy.
Right.
If you're going to be my people, you will have to represent me to the world around you and to the nations around you. And within the Levitical laws and things, you start getting this real sense of this is all about relationship.
Yes.
And it's the way you interact with each other, and it's the way you support each other and come together in a world that is disconnected from God. And actually, for the world out there who is disconnected, they want to look at you and they want to see that you are the real humanity because you're connected with a source of love and relationship and ultimately God. And so that's the start of this journey and this call. And it's this covenant relationship. It's what we do in marriage. Like, marriage is such a picture of the same picture there with God. And so when the story develops, you actually see these cycles of, at times they get it, and the people within leadership really leads them in that. And then there's times where they just fail completely.
Yeah, it's almost like adultery, isn't it?
It's
With
terrible. And actually, you think they're starting on a high, but it just constantly drops off.
Yeah.
Constantly, you get this sense of they just can't do it.
No.
And this problem of humanity is still, even in the people who supposedly has this connection with God, struggles. There's a real struggle there to do that.
So as we contemplate this journey that this people that God's called for himself, who is to be holy like he is holy.
Yeah.
What we kind of see throughout the pages of the Old Testament again and again is this kind of return to individualism, this coming out from God and this serving self, don't we?
Yeah, because again, you go right back to the start of Genesis where the snake is there tempting Adam and Eve. And he paints this picture of, look, this makes you look really good, it makes you look wise, and it's a beautiful thing. That enticement and that temptation is always present throughout the whole process. When you get to Babel, for example, and people are like, hey, let's build this amazing tower. Exactly, Ducky. Let's build this amazing tower that, look at us, we are gods. Look at us as humans. So it's all pointing back to the self, the me. And then as you go further along with the story in Israel, some of the kings marrying women from other nations, and these women bring in these gods and idols, and it entices people back again. All these idols is about, how can I be prosperous? How can it bring value to my life and to me? And it's all about the me. Right through till today. Again, everything that we're surrounded by is about me. How can I look good? How can I look successful and prosperous and things? So,
but as we reflect on where we are today as well, we have the joy, don't we, of social sciences and things. Coming back to what you were saying, that how we were made first to be in community with God in the garden, and when God called a people for himself to be in community with him, what we can see as we look to the social sciences is that that's right. That's absolutely right. That we are made for community, that it has real dangers of being isolated on our own for our mental well-being, doesn't it?
Because even neuroscientists, I've read a book of an atheist neuroscientist who says the brain is a social organ. It's made for connection. And he then unpicks Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying, Maslow's wrong. One of your most basic needs is that social connection that we have. And it's how a baby survives with its mum, because it's that connection it has with its mother. So you don't really need science to prove that this is true, but science just actually backs it up. But obviously depends on your worldview and how you see things, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've been made for this community, and we can see it in the social sciences, we can see it in the Bible. We can clearly see that community is important. But we have this fundamental issue of these other ideologies that always tear us away. We see it with the people of God, we see it today. How are we ever going to get there? How are we ever going to get to this place of having community? We have to turn over the pages, don't we?
We do, yeah.
We have to turn the chapter.
And there's this thread throughout the Old Testament as well, that as these people are failing, there's this promise, like one day God is going to bring this to fulfillment. This is a journey, and actually that's where we get to the New Testament, where things really come to life.
Okay, so should we take a wander and let's explore that very question of how do we see a New Testament community of God's people as it should be, not only in the time of Acts, but today.
Let's do it.
And what could it look like? Let's go. So Berno, as we've been looking at, we've just left the Old Testament behind. We've seen this community of God, this people who are supposed to be holy, spotless, blameless, people who are reflecting God's holiness. And yet we've seen this issue of the ideology in the world creeping in, and we're left asking the question, how is this community ever going to be formed? Of course, as we turn to the New Testament, we see not only is it formed, but we see not just a nation, but all humanity can come together to form that community of God. Talk us through that. What does community look like under this new covenant that we see in the New Testament?
You have to bear in mind this thread in the Old Testament of this promise that there's God's Spirit is going to make a new heart. He's going to make these hearts whole and new. Because and this was what Jesus' struggle was with the Pharisees of his time, was these people built their lives around the law, the whole legal system, the temple, the institution of the temple. That was their understanding of God being with us in this temple. But the prophets promised, no, God is bringing a new temple, which his Spirit is going to inhabit, similar to the old one, the previous one, but something different is going to happen. Yeah. And I think for us humans, because we're so materially aware, it can sometimes really be hard to see that. So in one sense, I don't blame those Pharisees for thinking, okay, God's going to build a new temple, his Spirit's going to fill it up, and that expectation. However, that just never happened. And then Jesus comes along and he says, how blind are you guys to see this? So there's a real tussle there, but then he journeys with his disciples to show that you can almost see that's the start of the new humanity. Yeah. And they struggle to get it as well. But then Jesus points to the temple and says, I'm going to destroy this. In 3 days I'm going to destroy it, and then I'm going to rebuild it. And people struggled with that because, again, material sense, we think very materially.
Well, it took them a long time to rebuild it the first time.
It did, didn't it? It did. And yet, through Jesus' death and resurrection, up until the point of Pentecost, suddenly you see the Spirit coming down, not on a building, but on people.
Right.
And that little community that Jesus journeyed with right at the start suddenly explodes, and the Spirit of God inhabits the new temple, which is the people. It's us. Yeah. And it's that community. And so suddenly when you look at the Old Testament, you look at the letters Paul writes to the various churches and things, he's consistently telling them, you as the people are the temple of God.
Right.
And you need to work on your relationships with each other. It's not about the Jewish legal system and this conflict in culture. Actually, your foundation is different. It's on Christ. That's what you're building your life on. Yeah. The law of Christ. Mm-hmm. And it's a spiritual thing that inhabits your heart. And we have to then work through that as we connect with God on a spiritual level. Yeah. Again, this Spirit is not poured out just on the Israelites, on the Jewish people. It's open to everyone. That temple curtain breaks in half from top down, and it opens the holiest of holies up for all to enter in.
And amazingly, if we think about Pentecost as well, and the tongues coming down, and the language being heard, so that good news of what God was doing of forming a community for himself could spread out across the world, which of course we think back to what you were talking about earlier on with Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. What happened there was that God scattered them and muddled their language. And so we see God come and restore and bring about this new humanity, this new people of God who can come into communion with him and come into communion with one another.
And it's still the same as God established the pattern in the Old Testament of the Israelites being this representation of God to the nations around them. That still stands.
Yes.
But what's different now is that we as the people of God, the relationship we have with each other, and as we invite others into that, and as we try and say, come world, come and look at God, we've got the fruits of the Spirit for people to really encounter God. And again, that's all relational. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. It's all to do with relationship. Yeah. And so if we really want people to understand and connect with God, we need to bear the fruits of the Spirit in mind, and we need to think, well, this is just relationship. It's not got anything to do with buildings. Yeah. And so how do the buildings ultimately serve the purpose of the community? Yes. And how do the kind of the cultures we shape around us? Again, because in the world, there's different types of cultures and peoples, and yet the culture of the kingdom of God and the culture that Christ sets, that's kind of spiritual culture that we see through the fruits of the Spirit, that transcends all cultures. And ultimately, it breaks our human-made cultures down.
Yeah.
And this is the wrestle we have now within our Western society of individualism.
Yeah.
Is completely against the culture of the kingdom of God. It's against the fruit of the Spirit.
Yes.
And materialism as well. It says the physical stuff you see is what you need to get to be successful. And the Bible says the relationships is what you need to be successful.
And of course, if we think back to the law, that was what set this people, the people of Israel, apart. When Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? What's the greatest law? He turned around and said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah, right.
And what will we see in individualism? The love of self, the serving of self, me putting myself first. We don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So if we can learn to love others, if we can apply the fruit of the Spirit upon others, be generous, hospitable, we begin to build that community that God longs for as we seek him first.
And I think a big challenge for us as Westerners is because we're so focused on our individual selves, and again, there's a lot of calls out there for self-help and burnout and look after yourself and care for yourself. That makes sense in an individualistic culture.
Yes.
However, within community, we look out for each other. Actually, we bring respite to each other's lives.
Yeah.
So your needs will be met by the people you're connected with.
Yeah.
And you'll be meeting the needs of the people you're connected with. It just goes both ways, doesn't it?
It's fantastic. Berno, thank you so much for helping us through this biblical journey of community. And I really hope for you watching this that it inspires you about what is God's vision for you and I as the people of God, of what it is to do community, to push back against the culture of the world and those lies that creep in, and stand on the truth of what he asks of you and I. That is only possible through the great work Christ has done upon the cross and by pouring out his Spirit into our lives. So be blessed, go and build community where you are, and we'll see you at the next edition. Take care, and don't forget to hit subscribe.
And like.
Oh, and like.
And comment.
And comment.
And do a
notifications, all of that. Dialogue. Build community with us here. Thank you.
Nice one. See you later.
Take care.